Elden Ring. It's a pretty good video game. I know. That's a hot take. I've got another take. That's lukewarm. Shadow of the Erdtree. Also a really good video game. But it has its faults. And while I don't have a full review for you on this because I just didn't think it needed one, I feel like if you liked Elden Ring, guess what? The DLC is probably going to be up your alley. I did want to talk about maybe some of the difficulty, because that's been something that a lot of people have been talking about, why I think it's been difficult for some people versus others, and just my general experience with the game. That's just what we're doing this morning. That's it. Nothing fancy. There may be gameplay. There may or not, there may not be. I might even speak English during parts of this video. So let's begin. Elden Ring. What a game, bro. Listen. Elden Ring is like one of those games that even though it has no right to be as popular as it is because of how punishing it is compared to the average video game, it's obviously popular for a reason. It's a hell of a game. And I think it goes without saying that Shadow of the Erdtree was one of the most anticipated, if not the most anticipated, expansionary DLCs for any game in a long time. In fact, I mean, other than perhaps some expansions for, some MMOs and whatnot, where that's kind of like what keeps these live servicey games alive, like a Final Fantasy XIV more recently, and then of course Destiny 2. If you're just talking about like your single player experiences and whatnot, I don't think there's been an expansionary DLC that has been as anticipated as this one in a very long time, and for good reason. If you're just here and you're wondering, hey Adam, shut up for 2 seconds and just tell me what you thought of the game. It's good. It is difficult. It's not as difficult as some people think it is. It is very good, and if you like the base game, you're gonna like the DLC 80% of the time. For most people, I think you're gonna be fine. You're gonna have a good time. This DLC, just so we're clear, is bigger than most full-on video games that you will buy today. It's got more content. It's got more shit for you to do. This is bigger as a expansionary piece of content than most full-priced, get-in-the-door, first, single-player experiences that you're gonna have today. There you go. Now for the nitty-gritty, a lot of people talking about the difficulty around this bad boy. To the point where Steam, it was mixed reviews, which was shocking. Let me be clear. Shadow of the Erdtree should not be sitting at mixed reviews, ever. Let me follow that up. Earlier this morning, it flipped back into mostly positive. Maybe that has to do with the patch that went out yesterday that makes some of the game easier up front for the DLC. I don't know why they would do that, honestly. It's just gonna make the wall that they hit in the mid-game harder. But, they'll complain about that too later, I'm sure. But yeah, a hell of a game. A hell of a game. And I suppose to also just put a little cherry on the top of this bad boy. It has the best boss fight that I have personally experienced, maybe in the last 10 years, in any game. Final Fantasy XVI had some really epic boss fights, but the level of autonomy you had in those fights were minimal compared to what you would get, of course, in something like Elden Ring. One of the fights in, I won't say which one, I'm not trying to be spoilery. One of the fights, optional, I'll say that much, optional fights in this DLC is peak cinema. So there you go. Take that for what you will. If I was doing a full review, this would have a 5 stars. It wouldn't get 6, it would get 5. But why is this difficult for so many people where the base game perhaps wasn't as much? And I say that because obviously we've all heard every time a Dark Souls game or something comes out, same discourse every time. Game's too hard, need more difficulty modes, need this, need that, make this more whatever. It's not, you can't just keep doing, they can't keep getting away with this every time. But this was a little bit different because it seemed to be coming, a greater proportion of it seemed to be coming from the actual core fan base of the game and not just more peripheral. For the sake of having a conversation about it kind of people. This seemed like it was actually like some long-standing veteran players from the From Software, fan base were saying this is too much. What Miyazaki? I need you to take 10 or 15% off of this thing. This is getting crazy out here. So let's talk about that a little bit. I will say this. I didn't find it that difficult, but I think that's for a few reasons. And I think for the few reasons that I didn't find it particularly difficult are probably why other people did. So the first thing is, let's just be honest here. There is a growing and substantial portion of the Dark Souls and Elden Ring fan base that just when they get out of bed in the morning, I think the first thing they do is just slap themselves in the mouth a few times, maybe punch themselves in the balls, a little salt in the wound to get the day started, right? These are people that when they play these games, they would like, if they could, to feel actual pain every time their character experiences it in the game. These people are masochistic to the point where they want it to be a certain difficulty. And if you don't beat the game at the level of difficulty in which they have arbitrarily selected, then you haven't actually beaten any of these games. Like I thought that I beat Melania. In fact, it was on my second attempt. I thought I'd beaten her. As it turns out, because I had used my mimic, I have not beaten Melania. Who knew? Certainly not me until it happened. And that's not new. That has been a story for a good hot minute now. But we've gotten to the point now. It's like they're jumping the shark. 'Cause you gotta beat the game with a character that's like level 1, naked and afraid, no armor, dagger that you only use by shoving it in your butt cheeks and start friggin' swiping at it like you're friggin' twerking at the enemy. Like the specificity in which we have reached for some of the fan base in order to have said that you have beaten these games is getting silly. That being said, these are a lot of the people who are still also complaining about this being too difficult. And I think that's probably part of it, because to beat this DLC in that manner, to go in without using summons like a mimic or any other summon really, or the summon signs that are made available outside of many of the boss encounters, not being knowledgeable about the various other items that you have at your disposal for increasing your own damage or your own defense. All of these things will come together to make your experience dramatically easier or dramatically more difficult. And for that crew, this DLC will be unequivocally far more difficult than the base game. There's just no two ways around it. I played many of the bosses, especially in the first half to maybe 2/3 of the game, where I would go in and I would fight the boss for a bit, just by myself, no mimic, no nothing, just to get a feel for how difficult the bosses were and what the odds were, because I wanted to see how long I felt it would take for me to actually clear some of these bosses without using a mimic. And why would I do that? Well, I didn't feel like beating the shit out of myself to get through this DLC. I was interested in this DLC because I wanted to experience some more of the lore, and experience the world that they had put in front of me. I didn't want to hate the game because I was beating myself up to meet an arbitrary target. I've done all the Dark Souls games and everything, and I've done all sorts of stupid, silly challenges and beaten stuff, you know, whatever. I'm kind of past that now, so but I wanted to see what it would maybe take. And I would say that for the most part, most of the bosses, with an exception of 2 to 3 out of all of them, and I beat, to my knowledge, I beat every boss in this DLC. Most of them would have taken me between an hour and a half and 3 hours if I was just going in by myself to clear. And I would say that that's twice as long on average as the base game in Elden Ring did, took me. Although I went south instead of north first, and that was the first boss that you're supposed to fight, I fought 50 hours in. That was a bit of a different story. However, I would say it would probably take me twice as long. So it is on average a much more difficult experience. But this is by design. Imagine, if you will, you're Miyazaki. Your team has made all of these games in the Dark Souls series, Bloodborne, which apparently everyone wants to just forget exists over at Sony, except for in Astrobot. You've made all these games, and now Elden Ring has sold, what was it, like 30 million copies? It's just an enormous amount of copies. So you've got this major fan base that are veterans now of many years, on average. They've kind of seen and done it all. Right, the people who are playing these games tend to play them quite a bit, and they're quite good at what, you know, at the game at this point. They have gotten good, if you will. And you want this DLC to be challenging to them, because if you don't make it challenging to them, there will obviously be a lot of complaints about, oh, this was too easy, I just walked through it with my character from the base game. You know, because by the time you beat Radahn and Mohg, you know, your character, even if you were to start a fresh character, is pretty strong at that point if you're going to clear them. So he's damned if he does, he's damned if he doesn't. And so what do I think they did to offset this? Well, I think that they leaned more on the use of summons, and I think they made it kind of obvious that they wanted you to use more summons. They put a lot more summon signs for characters that you meet throughout the DLC in front of a lot of these boss doors. Whether you've met the characters or not, I had summon signs for characters I didn't even run into yet. So they were there purposefully. They were there with the understanding that a lot of these bosses would be much more challenging without any kind of help from an NPC. And so I think that many of these bosses were designed with that in mind, which means if you're going to fight them without any help from a mimic or another summon sign or anything like that, it's going to be a tough time. And that's because a lot of these bosses are incredibly tenacious. They almost never stop attacking once they start. They're very good at noticing when you were using a pot or something similar. They really punish you substantially, more so, I would say, than the base game by a fair margin. So if you don't have somebody else in there distracting occasionally, then yes, very, very difficult. And I think that, but not impossible, let me just be clear there, but just significantly more difficult, more challenging. There's a lot of attacks that have AoE follow-ups to them in this. In fact, oh my god, like almost every boss? Almost every boss, anyway. Close to it. And certainly the last boss. But yeah, you might dodge the first attack, but then the AoE that comes up behind it can be very difficult to have dodged the first attack in the proper little spot that they've, carved out for you that you'd be safe. It can be very challenging to land yourself there consistently, and not just get punish damage every single time. The number of windows against very many of these bosses for you to actually retaliate without also just immediately taking damage is kind of small. Not a lot of windows for that to happen, unless you get lucky on the RNG of some of the attacks and they're just like walking around or spamming like an easy to dodge attack. Of course, sometimes that does happen. So yeah, it is designed, I think, specifically with summons in mind, which means if you're not using them, you're going to have a bad time. I think let me solo her, who is now helping people with one of the bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree. I can't remember which one. I think it might be Mesmer. Anyway, I know I said I wouldn't say anything, but I think that's a known. I think that is a known quantity, and certainly not much of a spoiler to say that. So he's in there helping people with that. Even they said, you know, people just need to make use of more of what's made available to them, and it will make their life easier. And that's 100% true. You know, whether you're using, I think some people have forgotten, or maybe some of these people are people that didn't actually play Dark Souls before. Yeah, I think some of these people have forgotten that there are items that you can use that will make your weapons much more powerful. You know, grease and grease and things of that nature. I think some people forget that there are many Ashes of War that might be better suited in their build than the ones that they're currently using, or could make their weapons much more powerful in and of themselves. I think some people forget that you can, in Shadow of the Erdtree, I think a lot of people didn't even realize that you could use the shards that you find to level up not only yourself, but also the power of your summons. That's another hint that they were wanting you or planning for you to use them more often. You were literally given a thing that was leveling up the power of any and all things that you summon. If that's not a broad enough hint, I don't know. You know, between that and putting a summon sign outside of nearly every boss door, I mean, come on. Clearly they were leaning in that direction. So if you use what's available to you, I think many people that were finding it difficult would be surprised to figure out just how much more difficult they were making it on themselves. And that's, of course, ignoring the people who were just, they might have known all this, but they were ignoring it because they want to be able to tell their friends that, you know, they physically, you know, cut off a limb and still managed to beat this game with just like 2 toes and blindfolded or something, whatever weird challenge they came up with for themselves. So for those of you who are on the fence and thinking, you know, maybe I don't want to get into this, don't be that caught up in it. You'll be fine. Just use what's available to you. Just like in the base game, your build will also, you know, change how much of a good or bad time you're going to have. There are definitely, you know, just by my description of some of these bosses, you might understand that builds that rely upon long wind-up time, so heavier weapons, if you're not ready to take or trade for damage, can be challenging in that respect. Or if you're a spellcaster and you've got some really long casting times, that could be a challenge, especially if you're solo and you don't have a summon that's kind of distracting them for long enough for you to get this stuff to cast. You know, there are builds that will make many instances more or less difficult. That's just kind of the nature of the beast, and it's just kind of exacerbated because of the style of bosses that they often put in front of you in Shadow of the Erdtree. So that's kind of, I think, all there is to it. I'm happy that people are getting out of this kind of difficulty discussion a bit more, and just accepting it. I think people are also going to figure out that they actually can continue to get through this stuff okay. I would say that I was, like I said before, very, very happy with this DLC in general. There were some other gripey things. I don't want to talk about too much because it's hard to do without being spoilery. I will say that there are aspects of how they revealed more about the lore that we got tastes of in the base game that felt like maybe a bit rushed. I was happy that it was there, but it was like, you know, it because of the way that it was done, it made some of it feel less significant than it probably should have. So like that was kind of like a touch and go for me. But I mean, the art team crushed it as always. The game, you know, from an art design perspective, is just absolutely phenomenal. A lot of the new weapons are super fun, and I would encourage people to not just lock themselves into, you know, what they used, even though that's what I did. At least try some of them out and see maybe if you want to, you know, give a new weapon a shot. there's a lot of really fun weapons out there with great weapon arts and things to mix it up and perhaps have an even more fun experience. Other than that, you know what? This video doesn't need to be much longer than that. We're already 20 minutes deep. I just gotta say, you know, this is not a get good video, but I do think that it is a case in which people perhaps need to understand that this was balanced differently. It is no longer, you know, as soon as personal summons outside of what was put in front of a boss door, like in you know, back in the day with the other Dark Souls games, as soon as we hit that point, and you're talking mimics and stuff like that, I think that changed how they had to tackle some of the difficulty design language and some of the decisions that they made to balance the game. Really, if I had to just one thing and one thing only, they really need to get the game running more smoothly. The last encounter was like 25% of the difficulty was the fact that on certain attacks, the frame rate just dropped to single digits for extended periods of time, and made it very difficult, as one might imagine, to dodge some of the most, if not the most, difficult attacks in the game to dodge. And so that would be a big thumbs up. You know, I've got a very powerful system, and even turning everything down significantly didn't do a damn thing. So this is just like a functional engine issue that they need to maybe have ironed out by now. That would have been nice. But everything else, great game. You know, phenomenally done. I think anyone that likes the base game is going to like Shadow of the Erdtree, guaranteed. So if you've been on the fence because of the difficulty discussions, don't worry about it. You'll be just fine. Just keep your head on a swivel, make use of what's available to you, and try to enjoy the game first and foremost, and then go back and challenge yourself later if you're one of those types. I think that's probably some of the best advice I've got for you. That's it for this video, guys. If you liked it, thumbs up. Give me a comment in the comment section below. Tell me what you think about Shadow of the Erdtree. Have you played it? Are you in the middle of it? What are your thoughts on it? And let me know if there's any other kind of content that you want me to do some videos on. I've been kind of scraping. If you're at this point in the video, you're interested in what I have to say, so I'm interested in what you have to say. You know, we're in a bit of a lull for news lately, so if there's any topics that you want me to perhaps consider covering in a video essay form or in a style like this, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll add it to the list of possibilities. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a good one out there, and until I see you next time, peace!